Now, welcome to the actual event, which is to talk about technology and how we can use that to make music. Now, our first speaker, I was very excited to come across David, and it just goes to show what a range of talents and information and knowledge there is in our member groups. So David is a researcher at the University of Surrey, an engineering technologist in the CTO group at Dell Technologies, and a contributor to the Internet Engineering Task Force, the standards body of the Internet. So he absolutely can explain what the Internet can or can't do, and whether our expectations of it are realistic, and where we should get frustrated and where we can make improvements. So first we're going to hear from David, and you'll have a chance to ask him questions specifically on that immediately after his presentation. And then we've got three other speakers who are going to talk about specific software. So we have Robin Simpson, who is the CEO of Voluntary Arts, but also a French horn player. Is that right, French horn? Yeah, okay. In the Northampton Symphony Orchestra, and they have been successfully rehearsing on Jamulus since August last year. And our second speaker is Kirsty Logan, who is the MD and founder of the Rabble Chorus in Suffolk. And they have been getting hundreds of people together every week on Jack Trip. And finally, Leon Gower, who's been working for Making Music as a digital producer, amongst his many other hats that he wears. And so he's been researching what other software there is out there to make music together, and his resource is just about to be published by us, but he'll speak a little bit about that. So now I'm going to hand over to David.
Which means I need to share my screen. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can see my screen. I'm getting a thumbs up, which means that you can see my screen. Good morning. Thank you, Barbara and Sharon, for inviting me along to speak this morning. In 15 minutes, I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of 56 years of the internet. The very first internet node was put together in 1965. Most people don't realize this. It goes back a long way. It was a US Department of Defense project, and has been very much funded in that way until about 30 years ago. And I've been involved in the internet for about the last 30 to 35 years. Who am I? I'm a professional engineer. I'm a member of the CTO group at Dell. I represent Dell at the Internet Engineering Task Force, which is the group that basically sets the standards for the internet and talks about what it does and what it doesn't do. I'm also a part-time researcher, but I'm also a singer. I'm a pianist and a singer. I love these things dearly. And these on the right are all my happy places, either singing in the choirs or playing the piano. I do a bit of accompanying, or going down to WOMAD, or being at the proms. I am a bit of a geek as well, so I apologise for that, and I hope not to wrap too many acronyms around this morning. So obviously the world has changed a little bit. We've gone into possibly less happy places at the moment with some of the Zoom calls. These are my crossword group, one of my and two of my choirs as well. We're all getting very used to what we can and can't do on the internet. What I want to explain is why we are where we are, and try and explain what the internet is. Now, most people think of the internet as being a defined thing. You go and buy an internet service from your service provider. But the internet isn't quite like that. It isn't one network. Internet actually stands for interconnected networks. It's a collaboration, a collective group of interconnected networks around the world. And it's based on the idea of a packet switch network. What do I mean by a packet switch network? Well, in the telephone system, when you call someone, you make a phone call to someone at the other end, and for the duration of that time, you are speaking exclusively to them. Your audio is traveling back and forward between them. You know that the audio is going to get there, you know the audio is going to come back. But you're limited. You're limited to talking to one other person on the telephone network. So in about 1965, along came some people and said, wouldn't it be a great idea if instead of having the entirety of communications controlled by what was at that stage predominantly one very large telecoms company in the US, AT&T, wouldn't it be great if we distributed this? And there were some good reasons for doing that. 1965, the main use for the telephone and the data networks was military control. And they were concerned that if having a central control place if that failed, would cause things not to work. So they said, rather than have this end-to-end communications, let's break the data into small chunks. These chunks are called packets. And let's send them one at a time to the other end. And rather than sending them across one particular path, let's decide to have an entire distributed network where every packet goes through the network in a different way to reach the destination. Now, this means that when you use the internet, you're using shared resources. It's not like the phone network. There are no guarantees on the internet. There's actually no guarantee that the data that you put into one side will appear at the other side at all, because you're sharing the resources with other people. And the benefit is that you get this wide range of connectivity and the wide range of ability to connect with other devices. The downside is that you lose some of that immediacy and control across there. So there's no guarantees. Likewise, one of the mantras of the internet was that there would be no overall control. No one person, government, organization, company owns the internet. It's a collection of people that decide to connect their networks together, and it's done purely to increase reach of the internet. Now, the other thing that I hear about is speed. Well, people say, well, I've gone off and I've bought a 2 megabits per second DSL line, or in my case, a 76 megabits per second DSL line. Are you actually getting that? When you're not, no. There is no guarantee of speed. This is like the road network. We have the capacity built in the network, and the engineers will try and match the capacity to the demand. But fundamentally, if you leave your house and decide at the same time as everybody else that you want to drive from where I am in Crawley to, say, my in-laws in the middle of Suffolk, there will be congestion, and some people will not be able to get there. Or alternatively, you won't know the timescale. Now, I could look at a rail timetable and I would know exactly how long that train's going to take because the network is managed. So the internet is more like the road network than the rail network, but obviously the rail network is limited to the times of leaving when they say and going where they say. So the road network is more open in this. And latency is the other big issue. I don't know how long it's going to take me to get to the other end because I need to share the resources. And because I'm sharing the resources, the nodes in the middle of the network can decide to drop, delay, discard, reorder any packets as they're going through the network. And this is done to manage the resources. And this is why you see glitches in communication, why you see things not appear in the right area. So let me just show you how the internet works for a very simple basis. And why there can be problems. So this is my simple internet. I'm talking between host 1 in the top left, host 2 in the bottom right. I want to send a message which consists of green, blue, red, in that order. So I pass them through the network. I'm hoping this video is going to do. Each of these packets can decide to take a completely different route through the network. And each of the nodes will decide, based on what resources they have available, what the capacity of the links are between them at that given time, how they will pass through the network. So you'll see here that what's happened is my data has arrived in a completely different order to that which I sent it. And that's fine, because what I now need to do is host 2 needs to look at this data and say, I understand something about this data and I'm going to put it back in the right order. The problem is that takes a finite amount of time. Imagine that I have an audio clip and I break it up like we used to do with tape using a razor blade. Maybe I was the only one that did that, and sellotape. I know you weren't supposed to use sellotape. And you stitch it back together in a different order. That's essentially what's happening here. It will take you a finite amount of time to say, oh, I know what these pieces are. I'm going to reorder them. And typically what we do is we send messages every 20 milliseconds. So it will take you, if you have 3 packets that arrived in this wrong order, it will take you at least another 60 milliseconds to work out what the actual order should have been. But what does this have to do with music? Well, we do several things to get music across the internet. First off, we compress the audio. So if you just took my voice and sent that across a network, the amount of bandwidth that you would need to do that vastly exceeds what's available on the internet. So we compress it down. We either use a codec called G711 or G729, and we break it down into a smaller amount of data. Some of these codecs are very good at music. Some of them are terrible. If you phone a call center and they put you on hold and they have music on hold, I'm sure you will have heard absolutely awful quality music at some point. That's because of the way that the audio is compressed. We then packetize it. We break it into either 20 or 30 millisecond chunks. Then we send it across the network, which, as you can see, can be a variable amount of time, and that's called jitter. And that takes in the UK something around 10, 15, 20 milliseconds to get from one end of the UK to the other. Then we stitch it back together again in the order that it should have been. So that adds a little bit more delay in. And the goal here is that I've broken my audio up into 20 millisecond chunks, and I send it back out at the other end at 20 millisecond chunks. And obviously it has to be regular, because if you stop, there'd be a break in the audio as you go through. But okay, what does this have to do with music? Let's look at a typical PC that's taking someone making music and breaking it up. There will be delays as you take the audio from the sound and convert it back to the loudspeaker or the headphones at the other end. This is called the mouth-to-ear delay. And that can be something of the order of 100 milliseconds. And if I look here, I'll send these slides round. But even something like taking the audio from the USB microphone I'm using here adds 1 millisecond of delay. Actually encoding it into a method that can be transferred across the internet takes 10 milliseconds. So very, very quickly, you reach a figure of about 100 milliseconds of delay. That sounds like quite a lot. It isn't for speech. In speech, 30% of the time, there's silence. In speech, only one person is talking at a time. It's not possible for 2 people to be talking at each other at the same time and fully understanding each other. 150 milliseconds is completely unnoticeable in a normal speech conversation. Take the example on the right here. I've got the word that has 32% of the data missing. But it's absolutely clear, given that we're talking about music, what that word says. You have been able to fill that in with 30% of the data missing. Try that with music. Try taking 30% of your notes out of your score and seeing if you can still fully understand the music and interact with each other at the same time. So the network and the mechanism that we use for transferring voice across the internet is inherently related to the latency. And you're not going to get away from that, because that's the main use of voice over the internet, is to break this up and to use some of these facets about the human ear and brain being very, very clever about filling data in, and also being very clever about speech. And speech has been the main use case. So we need to look at music across the internet in a different way. There are other sources of delay as well. One of the big sources of delay, which I don't think people are fully aware of, is Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi, which connects you possibly to your home router, is very, very limited in terms of bandwidth and spectrum. And there are a huge number of other devices that also use that same spectrum, and they add to the delay, because you're all, again, contending. You're trying to use the same very small amount of data. I discovered when we moved to Sky at the start of lockdown, which my son insisted on, that the Sky Plus boxes set up their own private Wi-Fi networks. So I suddenly went from seeing 15 Wi-Fi networks at home to 17 Wi-Fi networks at home. This all adds to the delay across Wi-Fi. Bluetooth is using the same spectrum. Baby monitors are using the same spectrum. Garage door openers are using the same spectrum. Then there's other areas, such as other people using your network, which you know about, but other people in your area. Every time you go up through to the local exchange, you are sharing resources. The more other people are using the network, the more constrained it becomes. Then you have the same people on your own ISP. They'll be sharing the resources. And to get across the internet, we use what's called IXPs, Internet Exchange Points. These are the core parts of the internet that connect people together. They can get very, very congested. And you also shouldn't forget what else is going on your operating system. Windows can eat resources, other operating systems can eat resources as well. So why is this important for music? Let's think about the speed of sound in room temperature. It's 300 meters per second. 3 milliseconds of delay, sorry, this slide's incorrect, I'll correct that. 3 milliseconds of delay represents 3 feet of distance between you. So with 114 milliseconds of delay, that's the same as trying to sing or play with someone that's standing 300 feet away from you. That's quite difficult to do. There is research that shows that the optimum is something around 15 to 20 milliseconds of delay end to end for mouth to ear music making. And there's another effect going on here as well. I'm sitting down here in Sussex. You can all hear me, but your ears are thinking that I am actually local to you. The same is true on the internet. No matter what the delay is, if even with 114 milliseconds of delay, the volume, the sound pressure will be the same. And your brain gets a bit confused about this because it's used to this inverse square law of sound pressure. It expects that as people move further away, the sound pressure decreases. And it doesn't quite happen like that in the internet. If you've listened to any of the programs on Radio 4 with remote audience, you'll notice there's a slightly unusual or odd feeling about the audience because they're not spatially placed in the same way that you would expect in a theatre. So what I'd say to you, if you're looking to make music over the internet, don't panic. It is not you. I regularly field people saying, I can't get my Zoom session working. It's not working. I can't hear things. It's me. I'm doing something wrong. You are not. Simply the technology is not designed to do the kind of mass rehearsals, music making that we have been expecting it to do. And there are techniques for working around this. So don't blame yourself for it not working with the kind of existing business-focused technologies, Zoom, Skype, WebEx, Teams. They were simply not designed for the kind of interaction that we as musicians need. It's a very close, symbiotic method of working that's very, very different from the kind of speech conversation that we have. Find other strategies to cope. Recorded and directed sessions online across the internet work extremely well. Hybrid sessions I found extremely successful, where I'm live streaming, where we've gone back into smaller groups that are able to rehearse. And the rest of this morning is going to be talking about some of the specialist solutions such as Jack Trip and Jamminess, which really do help move forward from that. So please don't panic that you're doing something wrong with the technologies that exists today. I hope that's given you a feel for where we are, where the technology is, and I'd be really happy to take any questions if there are any.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. David, it's well, I don't know any of that background. I only know how to plug the router in just about. Sharon, have you picked up any questions?
No, there's nothing in my chat.
Okay. So someone has mentioned, just as a comment, that the lag can be much greater with live streaming. Is this right, David?
Yeah, that's correct. So an interesting area is that people think that high definition video or video in general is difficult to do across the internet. Is going to be the most difficult thing. Everyone's got this idea of video being very high bandwidth and very difficult to do. We have ways around that, and predominantly video is one person. It pushes out. A really interesting thing to do, and live streaming in general, actually. Stick an FM radio alongside an internet radio listening to the same program, and you'll notice there's a massive delay between the two. And that's because we use a number of tricks to delay and push the video and audio out to the edge of the network. We don't actually transport that across the network. So in terms of live streaming, what happens is the video moves down through the network, and typically you will watch that not from where it's being sent from, but from somewhere on intermediate. So yes, you can get into quite large delays, but you're not usually interacting. So things like Jack Trip and Jamulus are designed to help that kind of really close interaction that musicians need. It isn't, you're still not able to achieve that with a live streaming.
Great, thank you.
Seen some other questions. Do you want me to take the other questions?
Yeah, if you can.
Yeah. Ping. Ping is a really interesting concept. It doesn't test the application. Ping gives you some feel of how long it will take to get from one point to any other point on the internet at a specific point in time. There is absolutely no guarantee that if you go and run a ping to one point, you will achieve that across any given amount of time. In fact, I can almost guarantee that at 3:30 in the afternoon, when the children come back from school and start using the general internet, ping times will increase to everywhere. It also won't tell you anything about how well the application is behaving. It really is a very, very blunt tool. The other one that's a very blunt tool that is some of the speed tests. Again, they give you a view of that particular point in time, not anything else. The other question was delay 60 milliseconds on Jamulus. I'll let people talk about the delays on Jamulus separately.
Yeah.
I've used it and seen less than that. Zoom. The way that Zoom work with their latest releases, yes, they have improved the codecs. If you remove the echo cancellation and you remove a lot of the other things that they try and do with the audio, you can improve things. However, I'm still measuring that Zoom as an application adds something like 200 milliseconds to each session. So you would still be seeing 200 milliseconds. That's just a facet of Zoom. It's designed for this type of environment. It's not designed for the interaction.
Okay, so there is a question about the coding they use to eliminate latency in Jamulus, which is probably not what Robin is specifically going to talk about, but is it worth just quickly explaining that?
Yeah, so I can. Okay, so there's two really interesting projects that have been quite successful in using the internet for live music making, Jack Trip and Jamulus. They're both using very different codecs. Jamulus, I believe, is using a codec that was developed by the BBC called Opus. And what they're doing, and what you can do with Jack Trip as well, is you can bring that packetization. Remember, I was talking about how you send this data every 20 milliseconds, and then you wait a number of milliseconds, say 60 milliseconds, so that I know that I've got 3 in the bag, and I can reorder them into the correct way. So that's 60 to 80 milliseconds before I even play the audio out. That's a problem with music. It's not a problem here. What Jack Trip and Jamulus do is they get away with all that. They just send the data out, and they send it at a more regular rate. They're using a codec that's more suited to music than to voice. It's a specialist environment. The issue there is you do tend to need a little bit more raw bandwidth. and you can find that you're limited in the geographic reach that you can cover. Although Jack Tripp and Jamulus have been able to do this with very good internet connections. I've actually done a session with a friend in New York, and it has worked. It can be related to the style of music as well. So if you're doing something very slow and you've got a long latency, you can make that work. If you're going to do something really up tempo and you've got a long latency, things start to fall apart. The sweet spot for latency is something around the 20 milliseconds, and that's mouth to ear latency, not network latency. Network latency will be a subset of that total end-to-end latency.
Okay, I feel that the questions are now coming up are more related to the applications that we're going to be talking about. So I think I'm going to move on for now, but we will look back at questions as well. So if I could invite Robin to tell us about their use of Jamulus now, please.
Sure, thanks, Barbara. Good morning, everybody. Nice to be here again to talk about Jamulus. I'm a French horn player. I'm a member of the Northampton Symphony Orchestra. And I think like many groups across the country last year, when we weren't able to continue our regular weekly rehearsals, the first thing we did was start a weekly Zoom social chat. So we would still meet on a Wednesday evening at our usual rehearsal time, and members of the orchestra just sort of talk about how they're doing, what they're doing, and when we might be able to get back to playing. And we went through exactly the sort of process that David's described now, of realizing how impossible it would be to play any music over Zoom, and we got into the multi-part lockdown recordings and all the other sorts of things that people have done across the country. But in the summer last year, I read an article about a choir in the States that was using Jamulus for live rehearsals, and I got interested in whether this might be possible and whether we might be able to use it for our orchestra. And so we started to experiment with it and set up an orchestral rehearsal on Jamulus on the 19th of August last year. And to cut a long story short, we've been using it every week since, apart from a few breaks in lockdown when we actually managed to get back together. Jamulus is free open source software, which is great because you don't have to pay for it, and it remains free to use. But the downside of that is it doesn't have a big commercial team developing it like something like Zoom does. So the software is necessarily not quite as user-friendly, not quite as simple to set up as some of the sorts of programs that you use for video calling. So there was a bit of a learning curve for all of us to get started. We have a mixture of people in the orchestra, some who are more technologically literate than others. But what was interesting was that the group who ended up taking part wasn't necessarily the most techie people. It was the people who were most determined to play music, and people who really did not think they were very good with technology have amazed me in terms of how determined they've been and how quickly they've learnt about the terminology and the equipment they will need, and so on. So using Jamulus, as David's described, it does has a slightly different approach in order to reduce the latency and make playing music practical. But you have to help. So firstly, there are hardware requirements without which it's really not worth trying. The first thing is you really can't use Wi-Fi. You've got to be able to plug your computer directly into your router with a cable. So suddenly people in the orchestra were learning what an Ethernet cable is and where they get it from and which port they plug it into. We had a couple of people try using it with Wi-Fi, but the delays are just huge compared to those who were able to plug in a cable. Also, you need to be able to plug in headphones, as with Zoom, but more so. If everybody's using it through a speaker, then you get feedback. You hear everybody else coming back through their speaker, through their microphone. It just doesn't work. So you've got to have everybody with headphones. Ideally, people need a good microphone that will plug into the computer. But actually, we still have several people who just use the inbuilt microphone in their laptop, and it's fine, actually. At the end of the day, what we're going for is something that enables us to play music together, So our priority is about getting the delays down so that it's practical to play together. The actual audio quality is slightly less important. You know, we're not recording it to issue it on a CD. It just has to be good enough that we can hear each other and that the timing is good. So for some people, it's just easier to use the inbuilt microphone rather than the added complication of plugging in a microphone and setting it up. But that in turn can create problems if your inbuilt microphone is picking up the noise of the computer fan or something else that adds interference onto the signal. But essentially, you need a cable to plug your microphone directly into your broadband router. You need some headphones and ideally a separate microphone. But then the process of setting up Jamulus is not always easy, and it is almost always different for each person and each computer. So trying to get everybody set up and working when by definition we're doing this remotely and I can't go around to their house and do it for them and show them what to do on the laptop means suddenly people have had to get to grips with understanding the sound card on their Windows PC and how it works and what it's called and the settings within Windows. David may say more about this because I'm not a technical expert, but Jamulus works much more easily on a Mac because of the sound system on a Mac computer. Windows has a slightly different approach to audio, which means you need to download a separate ASIO driver for Windows to make Jamulus work. But even when you've done that, that driver is very dependent on having sole control of your sound card. So often people have problems if they've got something like Zoom or Microsoft Teams on the computer and it is subliminally running in the background. Jamulus can't take control of the microphone and the sound card to use it. We've often had to try to close down other operating programs or reboot the computer and just load Jamulus and nothing else to make sure that you can select the right microphone and the right output. That's often the fiddly bit. So a lot of people manage to download the software and install it, but the first time they try to connect, they find they can't hear anybody else or everybody else can't hear them because Jamulus hasn't got the right link to the microphone or the output on the computer. And that often, for us non-technical experts, is a real sort of trial and error process of just fiddling with the settings and trying different settings and restarting it and downloading the driver again until you finally get it to work. Generally, once you get it to work, it's then fine. But I find each week, because I use the same computer for things like Zoom and other programs, I have to remember to kind of shut everything down, reboot the computer just before we're going to do Jamulus and just load Jamulus and nothing else until we get it working. But I wanted to speak a little bit about the actual experience of playing music before I pick up on some of the points in the chat. We've got to the point now we have a sort of core group of about 16 or 17 people who are playing with us every Wednesday night on Jamulus. And partly, I should say, the process of getting it started last summer actually was incredibly motivating in itself. That group of people, the initial sort of 8 or 9 people who worked with me to work out how to do it and to try and get it started, the first rehearsal on the 19th of August was awful. It was sort of embarrassingly awful. It was, if those of you of a certain age will remember the Portsmouth Symphonia, it sounded like that. It was bizarrely, horrendously awful. Some people were trying to use Wi-Fi, some people hadn't got their settings right, some people couldn't hear each other. We tried to play a bit of the first movement of the Beethoven Eroica Symphony, and it sounded like the worst sort of junior school orchestra version of it. But it was kind of laughably awful. You know, we had quite fun. We were sort of in hysterics trying to do it, and we really didn't think this was going to work. But everybody came back the next week, by which time everybody had read up a little bit, or everybody got a new Ethernet cable, or had kind of tidied up their computer settings. And there was that sort of determination. Initially, a lot of people were experiencing delays. Jamulus tells you the overall delay on your machine at any one time. So people were getting delays of sort of 60 or 70 milliseconds, which just really wasn't practical. We kind of played music, but everything got slower and slower as you wait to hear the other person before you play, and everybody's waiting to hear the other person. That delay makes it sort of slow down almost to a stop. But we've managed to tweak the settings. People have improved their own setup. I'll talk a bit about the server in a moment, but we improved our server. And now most people are getting delays of 30 or 40 milliseconds, which is just about right, actually. You can play quite well at that sort of level. But also, I think we, as a group, we have developed our Jamulus technique. So there is a little bit of, because it's audio only, you can't see each other, so you can't see a conductor. So you've got to listen very carefully. And you know, that's a different technique of listening carefully to the other instruments in the orchestra, listening to where to come in. But also there is a technique about playing slightly ahead of the beat, slightly anticipating, allowing it, not waiting and waiting for the other person. But as a group, we've kind of trained ourselves to do that a little bit better. But it has got better. And I would say the last few weeks in particular, it really just feels like a rehearsal now. It doesn't feel like a lot of time spent fiddling with the settings each week. It just feels like we sit down on a Wednesday evening and we start playing and we play through a piece almost without stopping. And it's got better and better. It's very enjoyable. It's not like playing face to face, and we're really looking forward to getting back to that. But it's kept us going through this period, and it's really been quite fun. There are a couple of kind of spin-off benefits. And it is strange how used we've all got to Zoom now. But just being in the Jamulus room before we start and everybody sort of saying hello to each other and chatting in real time with minimal delay is really exciting. It's sort of oddly exciting. It's you've got so used to that sort of slight pause in Zoom before the other person speaks, and almost that we don't notice it now. But suddenly speaking with that minimal delay, it actually, so the conversations we have during the sessions are quite fun as well. Musically, I should have said we are an orchestra usually of about 80 people, big symphony orchestra. We've got about 16 or 17 people coming on Jamulus at the moment. We're gradually trying to persuade other people and to increase the numbers. But in order to play orchestral repertoire, our conductor is playing a piano arrangement of each of the pieces, so that we've got a piano to follow. So that's quite handy, partly because he fills in the missing instruments, but partly also because if you're struggling to hear certain people, or certain people have got a bit of interference on their channel, as long as you prioritize the piano, you know, and you can hear that, you can play along with that and almost ignore the rest, and then it kind of works. So that's been quite an important part of it. And the other thing I should explain, with Jamulus, what happens, if you haven't seen it, is that the program gives you a screen with audio sliders for each of the other players. So when there are 16 people in, there are 16 sort of sliders, faders on the screen, and you can adjust the volume of each of those other people to suit your ears. It doesn't affect what they hear. So if, strangely, for some reason, all the woodwind instruments always seem really loud compared to the strings on Jamulus. So you kind of take all the woodwind down a little bit, you put the strings up. If somebody's connection is just slightly odd this week, you may have to reduce their volume or increase their volume. What's quite nice is that it remembers the settings. So providing the same people come in next week, it will keep the oboe quite low from what it was last week, and then you can keep fiddling with it. But each week, it's not perfect, and you know, each week there will be strange interference on somebody's channel that wasn't there last week, or somebody's delay will be slightly worse than it was before, and sometimes people have to kind of come out and come back in again to kind of reset the buffer and start again because they're just getting too much crackling on the line. So it's a problematic experience. It's not ideal, but it's the best we've found. And most weeks it works pretty well. Barbara, I should pick up on a few of these comments.
Yeah, I think the server question, is a useful one, please.
Yes, of course. So the way Jamulus works, Jamulus was designed for bands jamming online. So the real setup, the sort of primary setup is a lot of people have created servers on Jamulus which are open to anybody. So you can find a jazz session or a folk session or a rock session that you can just go in and jam with other people in Belgium or Germany or wherever who are online doing that at the moment. That didn't seem quite suited to orchestral music. The likelihood of people wanting to turn up and jam with Beethoven's Eroica Symphony at any moment seemed a bit less. So we set up a private server, which you can do in Jamulus. You don't need to make it publicly available to everybody else. And when you set up a private server, you have a particular address which you then share with your members, and they put that address into their Jamulus program, and they can then connect to your server. Initially, when we were getting going, I just set up that private server on my computer. So once you've installed Jamulus, there is a fairly simple way of creating a server on your laptop, and then everybody else connected to my server. But that meant two things. Firstly, it meant the server was only there when my computer was online and running Jamulus, which was fine if we had a sort of time we were going to do it. But if I wasn't able to be there 1 week, the thing wouldn't work. But also, it did create additional delays. So the fact that the server was on my computer, so all of the traffic was coming from everybody else into my computer and back out again, did seem to, initially those delays seemed good to us compared to what we'd been expecting. But after a few weeks, we realized there might be better ways of doing that. And somebody suggested we could set up a private server in the cloud. And I Googled this and found a very good guide somebody had done on Facebook to setting up a Jamulus server on Amazon Web Services, which is a cloud service. Probably the most single technically complicated thing I've ever done. I still have no idea how I did it. I just followed these instructions blindly. But it worked. And so we have a server set up on Amazon Web Services, which means it's permanently on. So we can use it at any time, partly because I can't now work out how to turn it off. I probably could if I went back through the instructions, but it was fiddly to do. But that's great because it kind of stays permanently open. There is a small charge for using that service. It's costing me a couple of pounds a month, I think, at the moment, but it depends a bit on how often we use it. But it has vastly reduced the delay times and made the thing a bit more practical for us. It's also useful because some members of the orchestra are using it at other times in the week. So we do a session on Tuesday with the horns. We play horn quartets on Jamulus. Some other people have used it at other times to do sort of small group chamber things. Setting up the server on your own machine is actually surprisingly easy. Setting up the server remotely was, to me, horrendously complicated, but I found a good set of instructions and followed them.
I think I'm gonna stop you there now, Robin,
okay.
Because we do want to also hear about Jacktrip and about other systems. So I think we'll pick up on some of the other questions later. I was just going to, Kirsty, where have you gone on my screen? To see whether we can hear from Kirsty now, who's been using a different system called Jacktrip. Also Kirsty runs a choir, so that's different again to the instrumental. So Kirsty, would you share your experience with us, please?
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm the founder and musical director of the Rebel Chorus. I think Barbara earlier said that I had hundreds of people on Jacktrip. I don't have hundreds of people on Jacktrip. I have hundreds of people in the choir. Slightly different, but anyway, yeah. Many of the things that Robin has said are very familiar. We went through the same process, as I'm sure as a lot of you have. And I have a music tech background, but not a computing background. So I was very keen to sort of see, you know, surely someone somewhere is doing something that can get us a bit closer to rehearsing online, and started seeing kind of rumours about something, just little odd lines here and there on discussion forums about some work coming out of Stanford University, and sort of chased up those little rumours and started hearing about Jacktrip, which they were kind of getting up and running and trying out over in America. And so we essentially became kind of UK pioneers, if you like, in terms of running a group. And the way that we did that is that I went to my choir and said, are there any people in my choir who would be interested in just helping me do an experiment and seeing if we got a chance at all of working out how to do this. And fortunately in my choir I have two computer coders who really know their stuff on that kind of thing, and a couple of other people that were prepared to be guinea pigs and sort of trial things with us. So so we have a tech team, if you like, that we have built, 5 of us. And in November, we started kind of experimenting and trying to learn about how it all works and what we could do to use this new technology or this new coding. So Jacktrip is all open source. So if you do know somebody that's coding, they need to become your new best friend and get them on side quickly. The way that we did it is that Jacktrip really is different from Jamulus in that Jamulus, you're generally using the equipment that you've already got, and then you're using your Ethernet cable to connect up and things like that. Jacktrip goes a sort of step further, and we have built a kit which our singers use, and that takes all of the emphasis off whatever whatever equipment you've got at home. You lose all the latency that's already inbuilt to your computer or device or whatever. You don't have to worry about any of that sort of internal stuff. We have these little machines, which is a Raspberry Pi. So this is a Raspberry Pi 4, and I've got a little USB sound card, which is a couple of quid, and that goes into that. And then we have put the open source software called, which is a virtual studio, onto this device. So this is Pis are a really powerful miniature computer, and all of the power in this device is going on audio. It's not being used on anything else. So that makes it much sort of tidier in terms of how it's handling the software. And so we played around with various different ways of doing things, and we came up with a kit that has, as I say, a little Sabrent USB, a little Pi 4, and then we tested out some headsets, which has got a microphone attached to it, and it has a mic and a headphone socket, and that goes into your little sound card here. And it's all basically done on that. It doesn't connect to your computer at all. The only thing you need your computer, your device, or your phone. So this is good for people that don't have anything fancy at home. You can do it with a phone. The only thing you need to do that is you need to be able to access a browser to log in. And then the rest of it is all done via the Pis. So the way that I've run it for mine is a community choir. It's, we have people that have very various different tech abilities. We have people in the choir who had not had a mobile phone even a few years ago, had never accessed the internet. We're in rural Suffolk, so there's quite a lot of that. That's not unusual. And so this year has been quite a big deal for those people. Some of those people are now, they have a phone and they come onto Zoom, and that's a massive step for those people. And then other people are prepared to go just that little step further. But what my feeling was that the only way I'm going to get people using this equipment and rehearsing together is if I and my tech team put in all of the work and we make a package that is the simplest possible thing that we can roll out. So we did the tests, we did all the work ourselves. So this was back in November. We worked and worked and worked and worked. We tried all the equipment and we got it down to something that was the most affordable and but sort of cost benefits kind of situation. So the kits, so then what I did is that I invested in the first 5 kits. My tech team, a couple of them already had their own Pis and things like that, so they just built them on their own. And I invested in 5 kits, and I use those as a loan kit, and I loan those out to people so that they get a few weeks of just trying it for free, so they've got nothing to lose at all. And if they don't like it or it doesn't work for them or whatever, there's no loss. So far, everybody that's had a loan kit has gone, oh my god, this is amazing. Can I buy the loan kit? So as with an infection control thing as well, you don't really want to be passing on headsets which have got a close microphone. So yes, so what we've done is everybody that's wanted to keep going on Jacktrip, which is everyone so far, has buys the kit from me, and the kit costs £73. which is a lot, I totally know. But as I say, I've still got, and that as they buy that from me, then I go and buy another set of loan kits. And now what I've got is like sort of 10 loan kits, so they now go out, and some people in the choir may end up just hanging on to that loan kit for a little bit longer than other people, let's say, and that's fine, and they don't buy it, and that still stays, you know, as a sort of property of the choir, if you like. So at the moment as I say, it's been a slow rollout. We haven't wanted to kind of overload our system. We built our own server first of all. Jacktrip was all running over in America. In America it's taken off now, and they even sell, they're even starting to sell Jacktrip little kits on Amazon US, the American Amazon site, but nothing like that here yet. So we had to do everything from scratch. So we built all of the kits, we built our own server, we ran it off that. We discovered some interesting little glitches, like I'm having to change my broadband provider because it turns out that Vodafone and AWS servers don't like each other very much, and we get a sort of notification of a 50% packet loss, which is dire. And as you might expect with phone providers, can you speak to an engineer about it? No, you can't. You cannot get anybody to talk to you about it. So it's just like, right, fine, change broadband. So that's a bit of an issue. But since then, in the last, in fact, 2 weeks ago, Jacktrip has rolled out its own servers. And so we moved over onto a London Jacktrip server, and we're using that, which gives us a little bit more functionality. And we have a room, if you like, on Jacktrip, which is a 40 musician room. At the moment, I've only got just over 20 people in my Jacktrip choir. I've got another 10 coming online this week. We're rolling out the next 10, and we'll get them up and running, and then we'll roll out the next ones, and we'll just keep going for as long as people want to join. What else was I going to say? I think I'm so impressed with it that this is not going to be something that I'm just going to drop. This is something that for us in rural Suffolk is really brilliant. Broadband is a massive issue. If you become interested in using Jacktrip, I can recommend a site. The best site is called, what's it called? Musicians Together Apart. You go on that. And they have a really handy network test, which you do. And if I do that network test, I come in at the absolute bottom where they go, not recommended for you, this won't work. So just to kind of give you an idea. So I think for us, for people with mobility issues, for people with accessibility issues, things like that, this is brilliant because we can rehearse properly online. And you can do it in your house without having to leave it. For us, when we get bad weather, we get stuck, you know, we get snowed in, like this year, we use village halls. So when it's elections or whatever, we lose our rehearsal spaces. We've now got, you know, something that we can rehearse on. So it's good for that. It also, I'm an environmental activist, it also cuts down on our mileage because we have a lot of mileage in rural areas, and that's a real concern for me. So this allows us to rehearse without anybody leaving their houses, which is good for our carbon emissions, so it's good for that. What was I going to say? So there's lots of positives. I know that I'm going to play you a clip now so that you can hear. So this is probably, I think, this would have been the second rehearsal for some of our members. It was only the second time they'd come on and used Jacktrip. So this is 20 of my singers singing a 3-part harmony, Blowing in the Wind, and this is, there is no backing track, there's no click track. It's literally what you hear is like a count in, and that's it. They can't see me conducting, so they're having to do everything by ear. And there's, as I say, there's nothing to sing along with except for each other. So just so that you've got a clue, this is them. Thank you, Sharon.
3, 4.
How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? How many seas must a stand. Yes, and how many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
Thank you, Sharon. So, so as you can hear, I don't think that's too bad. I mean, that's a community choir. They're not professionals. They've never had to sing without having a conductor. I'm not there to kind of bring off the ends of words or stuff. They're having to just use their ears. So, in terms of oral skills, they're having to work quite hard, and it's quite a big deal. You know, it's a big step up from when we're all in a big room together, and they can see me and they can see my mouth moving or whatever, or we're using, you know, we're not using any backing tracks. Now I do, so for some songs I do play the piano as well. I have a little Focusrite, Scarlett Focusrite that my keyboards go into, and I can do that. One thing that we have tried is doing the hybrid, where we use, you know, where you've got your Zoom choir and your jack trip choir feeding in so that they can hear stuff. Now that is ideal, that would be great, and we have done it, but it's so massively dependent on the broadband conditions at the time, and you know, we have a problem with jitter really. My delay is not too bad. It's around, well, in fact, in comparison to some of the stuff we've been talking about, mine is about 11 milliseconds. So in comparison with, you know, the 60 or whatever that other people are getting, that's, you know, that's really good. But we do have a jitter issue, and sometimes so we'll get, you know, kind of just little noises and glitches and pops, which are really annoying, and it becomes extra annoying. I cannot really realistically run jack trip and Zoom in the same house on my broadband at the same time. It just is too glitchy. It's just too annoying. So we've looked at other ways. We've got somebody else running the Zoom, and I come in as a sort of co-host and things. It's sort of marginally better, but still a bit of an issue. So our next thing is, as I say, I'm changing broadband. We're going to try it with that. We're also going to try, maybe instead of worrying about Zoom, just keeping Zoom. Zoom's actually running fine as it is, actually. You know, it's a different feel, but it's okay. Bringing more people onto jack trip, as I say, we'll have 30 by the end of the week, and then probably go to a live stream audio platform instead, so that rather than having any of the visual stuff, even the people at home that are not on the jack trip equipment can, you know, be on an audio platform and can chat at the same time, so they're still part of it. And we try it like that instead.
Yeah. Can I just ask one? This is just me being stupid. These Raspberry Pi things are still being plugged in through an Ethernet cable.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, I should have said that. Yeah, absolutely. So the kit that they get is like Ethernet cable, Raspberry Pi, headset, Sabrent audio USB, and the other thing that we've also done is we've made up some earth cables so that people can just plug them to their radiators, because a few people, you get like a 50 hertz hum coming through, but now one of my tech team has written some code in so that we can remove that from things as well. But yeah, no, people can't see each other. I just spotted that. No, it's all audio, and you'd think that might be a bit weird, but actually, because of the thing that Robin was saying earlier on, because the latency is so small, that you're having a conversation, and it's so much less tiring than trying to have a conversation on Zoom, because it is instant. You know, it's just like being down the pub. So we're just having a chat, and you know, I tend to do it sitting at my piano, and I've just got my headset on, and everybody else is sitting wherever they're sitting. You know, and it's just lovely. We just have a really nice time, and we can sing together. And the only thing I would say musically, I think there's a positive and there's a slight negative. The slight negative would be that even with that, you know, even if you're down to 11 millisecond, but with some occasional spikes up to 40 or whatever, you still have a slight feeling that you just need to make sure you sit on the beat, just push onto the beat. But I would say that the noticeable thing with, say, like that blowing in the wind, where I think it wasn't really that noticeable, when you know what you're doing and you know your part, that just goes, that melts away. When you don't know your part, that's when you start getting the delay, where people are just kind of slightly hesitant and they're just a little bit unconfident, so they're just maybe waiting for someone else, like you would in a normal rehearsal. And so that's where it really helps to have, you know, your rehearsal tracks or whatever, so people go away, they have to do homework, you know, and they come back, and when they know the parts, we can sing together really easily, and you don't even notice the lag then, which is really good. And the positive, I would say, which one of my bassists said, was that, which I hadn't even thought about actually, is that we use some software called Super Collider, which splits the voices out across the stereo field, so that it feels and we add some room reverb, so that it feels, sound wise, it just feels like you're in a rehearsal room together.
Wow.
But they noticed that, whereas, because I have a massive choir of hundreds, you know, they noticed that instead of where they're normally standing in a group of basses and they're really, really hearing all the basses around them and not really that much of the sops or the altos or tenors or whatever, in Jack Trip on their headset, they can hear all the other parts, and it's like, oh, that sounds quite good. You know, they're actually hearing the other parts more easily than perhaps they would in a real rehearsal, which I hadn't even thought of, you know, so that's a positive.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. That's so interesting. Now we're just really going to run out of time. I just want to hear no, it's because it's also interesting. I don't think anybody minds that we heard for longer, but Leon, you've been looking into some of these and comparing them, and you've got another one. So one in the chat mentioned was Jam Kazam, which you've looked at for your resource, and there was another one, and also a server solution. Leon, do you want to just quickly give us a lowdown? Oh, where is Leon gone? Sharon, have we lost Leon?
Yeah, we might have done. I can't see him in the list.
Oh, okay. Maybe he's got internet connection problems.
Why don't you take some questions, and I'll let you know when he appears.
Yeah, okay, great. So Sharon, have you got any that you picked out? Because I've been...
Actually, there's been quite a lot of activity in the chat, and I'd like to say thank you to Robin, who seems to have been doing a really good job of keeping on top of answering all of the questions in the chat. Maybe you should ask Robin. He seems to be more on top of what's going on in the chat than I am.
I mean, I've kind of, someone mentioned that there's also another new system called Flock, apparently, which is being developed, so we don't know anything about that.
Just a quick comment on that. That's a plug-in to Zoom. Flock was an old social media website, a web browser that's been repurposed for interaction. It runs in a similar way that it runs alongside of Zoom, and there's a plug-in to Zoom, but there's very little. I have very few details about it other than that.
Okay. Brilliant. So we have talked about servers, and so there is a question, Robin, about the slowest participant's connection, and does that matter? Do you have any?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I have an easy answer to that. And David might advise on what would be a slowest speed that you might get away with. What I can say though is that the slowest participant doesn't affect the others. So you know, the slowest participant may find it hard to use Jamulus, but it doesn't ruin the session for anybody else. And we've had occasion where, and sometimes it's not about your broadband speed, it's about, you know, the odd situation on the internet that evening, or other people in your house using your broadband or something, which means that we're playing what sounds great, but there's one player who always seems a beat behind and is sort of well out of sync with the rest, and embarrassingly awfully so. In which case you can just mute them. You know, you kind of, people can play along and not realize that everybody else has turned them down or muted them. So it's sort of, if there is a blip, it can still be a reasonable experience. I think, I mean, I've got quite a good broadband speed here. We're on fiber, but quite a few people in the group are using it on relatively low speeds, but it's got to be broadband. It's, you know, you can't use it on 4G. It's got to be a decent signal. David, did you have a?
Yeah, just a couple of comments on the whole question about bandwidth and the way that it's given. The numbers are actually quite meaningless, because what we're worried about is what it actually means for the interaction. So you also need to remember that broadband is not the same speed to you as up back into the internet is asymmetric. So you would find typically that the upstream speed is very much slower than the downstream speed. And upstream is typically where you hit the problem. So unfortunately, that's from the home back into the network. The other side that you need to think about, I've spun up some servers on a company called Linode and AWS. You need to consider not just the capacity to AWS or to one of those cloud providers, but also the size of the server that you buy. And that, I'm afraid, is a bit of a black art at the moment. If you're involved in some of the Jack Trip discussions and the Jamulus discussions, they're still trying to work out what size these servers can be. We've gone to about 30 to 40 people on a Jack Trip server, but that actually has to be quite a large server to do that. And I'm afraid large in terms of cloud provider means expensive. So you're buying CPUs, you're buying a computer sitting somewhere in the middle of the cloud. And that's still very, very much something that Jack Trip through Karma at Stanford are still trying to size what that server should be like. And then the other side that you need to consider, some of the cloud providers actually limit the amount of bandwidth that you can use to their data center. They'll give you a limit of either speed or amount of data. And with music, it's very, very easy to go over the top of that. So when you think about this, you need to think about the number of users and you need to try and work out what that size would be. 20 to 30 is a good number. Don't expect to be up at 100. Certainly don't expect to be around the 60 mark. 20 to 30 is a good manageable number in this kind of environment.
So I was just going to ask about that because, Robin, you said that Jamulus will accommodate up to 50, so not more than that, right? So up to 50.
Well, they keep, of course, it's open source, so it keeps getting updated. But the latest I've seen is that they extended the maximum numbers to 50. We've not tried quite that many, but yeah.
And what about Kirsty? Sorry, I was just going to ask about Jack Trip. Do they have a limit in any way? Sorry,
I was muted. I was in the middle of writing an answer to someone. As I said, you get on the Jack Trip server, you get a room, and the biggest room size is 40. Right. What I'll probably be doing is having separate groups that rehearse up to the size of 40, if you see what I mean, rather than trying to have loads of people. And apart from anything, one of the things that does take a little bit of time is that we tend to, when people come into the room, they speak and they say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or whatever, and we can then quickly pan them over so that we pan all of the basses together, all of the tenors together. We sort of split them out, and you wouldn't really want to be doing that with like hundreds of people. It would take hours. Okay. So there are practical things about it as well. Okay.
No, thank you. And sorry, David, I interrupted you. You had.
Sorry, can I just say that Leon's back as well?
Great, thank you. Yeah.
So one of the things with Jack Trip, the Jack Trip Foundation, Jack Trip is actually built by the Center for Music Research in Stanford University, and they have been running tests. They've got to a simulated environment of 500 people on a server.
Wow.
However, the size of server that you need to do that and the amount of bandwidth that you need into that server would be prohibitive for amateur groups.
Great, thank you so much. Now, folks, I'm fine to carry on beyond 11:30, but I don't know what some of you are like. So if anybody does have to leave dead on time, then obviously please do. So Leon, I think you're back. We've heard about Jack Trip and Jamulus. Will you sort of fill us in on the research that you've been doing, please?
Yes, yeah, and sorry to have disappeared of all the events to have an internet problem. I've been making a resource for making music on this subject, looking more at the practicalities of how does a group use this, and how, if you're setting this up for your group, how do you get the group up and running on it. And I know we've heard a lot of good stuff already, but what I thought for 5 minutes would be useful to do, I was going to go through some top tips that I've kind of gathered for all that should be appropriate to all of these platforms. And then I was going to share my screen and just show a couple of the platforms and how they actually function for the benefit of somebody who's never seen one, and especially for those who are going to be joining one that's already been set up by someone else in their group. So lots of these top tips have already cropped up, but 100% on everything I've come across is the Ethernet cable. That's hugely important for everybody, regardless of the whole group. It can't be just one or two. I've noticed a lot of people mentioning, if you're joining with your whatever computer, whether it's a really state-of-the-art one or people having great results using slightly older machines, if it's a laptop, definitely have it plugged into the internet supply, because built into the kind of setup, apparently the the working speed of your computer sometimes is lowered if you're running off battery power on a laptop to make it last for longer. And we want to be using as much kind of, I'm speaking about this in layman's terms because I am just a layman in computer speak. So yeah, you want to make sure it's plugged in. And also you can go into the control panel on Windows computers, and I believe Apple computers as well, and make sure it's on high maximum performance. And that could well be important. I've seen in the chat that there's been some people sharing the online groups, and there's a big online community with all of the platforms that have been mentioned officially on their websites, but also on social media, where people are sharing their personal experiences. And because it does feel like these platforms are fairly new, those are brilliant places to go looking for kind of people going through similar things to you. It's likely that someone's used a similar setup with similar equipment, and yeah, definitely make the most of those. It's been mentioned when we've talked about all of the different setups, the fact that you can't see everybody, and there is the argument that you can potentially get a Zoom running up as well at the same time. But if you don't get that going, or if that isn't possible for whatever reason, do make it clear to the group that they're not going to see each other, because this is the huge difference if you're joining and you haven't been setting this up. If you're a member in your group who's just been told, we're going to try out this new system, because I think that is potentially quite intimidating, and it's very difficult to get any feedback as if everything's going well from your end. So make sure everybody's up to speed on that, and musical directors as well. Just, yeah, it's going to take a bit of a consideration of how just the logistics of organizing a rehearsal. Maybe using some of these platforms do have a text messaging service built in, or perhaps you could rely on another one like WhatsApp text or WhatsApp groups and things like that, to be sharing information at the same time, letting people know that the next piece is whatever it happens to be. And much like when we did one of these sessions on live streaming, suddenly becomes a bit of a bigger production almost. Instead of a rehearsal, we're kind of doing a little broadcast. So you may need to think about having like an assistant for kind of producing this and them taking charge of that, because it suddenly becomes a lot for one person to manage. And the downside of things slipping there is the person who's not that confident in the rehearsal might be a bit lost. With lots of this kind of talks of audio interfaces for people who haven't already got audio interfaces, and exploring using servers, for lots of these, there is a way to get going in quite a rudimental way without spending any money. And I would definitely recommend trying all of these platforms without spending a penny, maybe just with between 2 or 3 of you in your group, and just see which ones initially seem like easy goals before you start investing. And with that in mind as well, I don't know the reason for this, but when it comes to the audio interfaces particularly, it appears that with Jamulus and some of the other platforms, some of them work better than other ones. And I don't know why that is, but I know on Jamulus, or in the Jamulus kind of online community, someone's built a spreadsheet where they've listed a load of audio interfaces, and people have written, this is terrible, or this one works really well. So yeah, if you and your group are thinking about spending any money on things, do take a look at things like that, because it seems that you could get a state-of-the-art interface, but I guess when these were designed, they're more about recording in a studio, and we're using them for something else. So yeah, have a bit of a research into that. And as well, this last one has been covered, but thinking about tech support, there isn't a kind of, these aren't off-the-shelf pieces of equipment, and even more so than that, for the person joining your rehearsal, this isn't a kind of a thing that's well documented on the internet. When you do get into looking for it, there's lots of very technical things, but there isn't that much information of simply, how do you join if you've been invited to one of these? So think about how you can make that very welcoming, almost a bit of a tech support setup. Maybe if somebody just sticks together a simple Word document doing a very clear instructions of how you can join. I know these things are more work, but it might make it a bit simpler when you get to that point of everybody going on rehearsal number 1. And now I'm just going to quickly share my screen, and I'm just going to show a couple of the platforms just so we can see what they look like for the benefit of anybody who has never opened any of these. So here we go. So you should see my my desktop of my computer. I'm using a Windows computer, and this is Sonobus, which is, I think under the bonnet, it is fairly similar to Jamulus. I could be wrong on that, but this is one of the platforms that has been investigated in the resource that we've just put out. And this is the screen that you get to if you've been invited along to join one of these. And just to give you a quick guided tour around it, there's a big setup audio button in the middle where you go to select which microphone you have plugged in, whether you're using your kind of sound from your computer or you have another your audio interface plugged in. And then there's a big connect button. So I'm just going to click that. And this one, like all of them, I think, to download the actual kind of platform is completely free. It's when we get into the getting server space and stuff like that the costs come up. So you can download these and have an experiment before you've even got going. And then this is the connect page, which is kind of similar to Jamulus, which I'm going to open in a second. And if you have been sent a kind of IP address, which for the sense of this is like an address where your rehearsal is going to be, there's a connection server area here, and you would just copy and paste that in there and then click connect. I'm going to click connect up here as if I'm creating a group from scratch within the platform, which as you get into it probably isn't the best thing. It may be better to look at servers, but this is the view in Sonobus. And like I think Robin was saying, with all of these, what you get once you get a whole room of people in there, which this one unfortunately isn't, is a kind of mixing desk view. And you've got to remember or remind all your group that for the most part, I believe all these platforms rely on every individual mixing their own personal mix. And if somebody hasn't been welcomed to that concept, they might not know that that's an option. So they would get a slider for every single person in the room with them. This one lays them out horizontally, so they would go across here, and at the top we've got my level going in, but we have one for everybody else, and it's up to us to kind of mix that if we decide whatever person is too loud or we want to hear something else more prominently. And as well, I think this one does have the panning built in, so you can pan a certain instrument further to the left and right or anything like that. This one as well has a few other built-in features like a metronome and a recording function, but those are to explore once you get going. So I'll close this down and I'm going to quickly open up Jamulus as well in the same way. And this is opening up Jamulus for the first time. I may have a slightly older version here, but this is as if I haven't connected to everything. So I've imagined that I've set it up, I've opened it for the first time, I've gone into the settings and I've told it communicate with my microphone as I've got set up, and then I need to get the address for my server from my group. So I'll click connect here, and this will bring up a whole long list of public servers that are around me. I think it does them in order of the closest ones, but it's likely that my group again have made their own private one, and they will send me this row of digits, which is the IP address. So I'll paste them in here. And before I do so, I just wanted to, and this might have been mentioned when my internet went down, mention another server option. We looked at the fact that you could create a server on a separate computer that one of the members has, or we could pay and subscribe to or pay on a monthly basis for some kind of server based owned by a cloud company. And I come across an organization called Cord, who, well, my understanding of this is they have got a huge area of server space, and they're dicing it up and letting people use it for free for certain amounts of time. And you can't schedule one of these, but you can go onto this. I just made an account very quickly and easily, and you select the closest server to you. Unfortunately, there's only one in the UK at the moment, and click generate, and then it will give me an IP address. Only one person needs to do this in the group. So I've done that a couple of minutes ago, and I copy the IP address. I don't need to do anything technical at all. So this could be a great option if you're in between that kind of server state. You've decided you need to go down a server route, but you haven't yet got the technical knowledge in your group or the time to invest in trying to build a server of yourself for your own. And so, yeah, I imagine this probably wouldn't be quite as good as if you had your own server set up exactly how you want it, but it could be a good in between. So, and this will give us the example of how we join. So I've copied the server address from there. And if I was setting this up for a group, I'd go on to email and send this to everybody and say, let's meet here right now. We're going to have a rehearsal. Because, yeah, unfortunately, it launches from immediately. So if we'd have set up our rehearsal for tomorrow at 6 p.m, I would just have to make sure I do this at 6. And then I've gone back to Jamulus and I paste in that number there, and then I click connect. And fingers crossed, within a couple of seconds, it should bring up a little welcome card to say that I've joined. I do have a slight fear that this may have been knocked out because my internet and my home went down a few minutes ago. But I will explain as well just where everything is on the screen in Jamulus whilst we're waiting for it to connect. On the left-hand side, you can see a meter going up and down, and I've got another microphone here plugged into an interface, and that's my kind of monitor that sound is coming in from my computer. Because that's the other thing, you can hear yourself or set it up to not hear yourself, but that's the kind of doubt. Can everybody else hear me? So there's some handy metering there. And once we're connected, there'll be a kind of mixing desk view in here with everybody else. So again, it's the same principle. You mix the levels to your own taste. And I think Robin mentions that actually, if you come back to the same room again, it would remember all those slider positions. So it should be in the right ballpark area. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's connecting. No. But I think that's my internet connection problem.
So I think we're going to have to leave it there, Leon, because we still have, some questions as well that probably haven't been answered. So firstly, so there's some we're talking about adapters, Ethernet cables. So Sharon, have you, sorry, because I've been looking at something else.
Yeah, there's one question I'm not sure has been answered here, which is why do I need a Jamulus audio interface? I plug my microphone and headphones directly into the PC sound port connectors. What else should I be doing? Who'd like to answer that one?
I don't know, is that a Robin question?
Well, I kind of answered it. I don't think you do, but it depends a bit on what microphone you're trying to use. And whether Jamulus will recognize it. If you've got a microphone you can plug directly into your computer, Jamulus should be able to pick it up. You should be able to use that. If you're looking to use a more fancy microphone, better quality microphone, a lot of those will require an audio interface in order to work with your computer. So it's less about Jamulus, it's more about how you connect the microphone to the computer.
Okay, so there's requests for Kirsty to whether she can share her setup. So obviously we're happy to discuss that with her. But is that right, Kirsty, that you have someone who knows what they're doing, who's doing the programming of those Raspberry Pis?
I've got a couple of people that are coders, so they are installing the virtual studio software, if you like, and building the Raspberry Pis. I've not done that at all. Frankly, I've got enough to do running the rest of the choir, but my setup is kind of slightly different because obviously I'm running the choir and I've got pianos going in, but I have mentioned that I'm using a Scarlett Focusrite to just so that I've got a microphone, standard microphone input and keyboard line in input, and I could also use backing track line in input. But as I say, for my singers, what they have is exactly what I showed you. It is just a Raspberry Pi, a Sabrent USB and a headset, which is, 13 quid job it's nothing.
So if you were using an instrument, you could have a second microphone that is, for instance, placed, do you know what I mean, near the bell of your trumpet or whatever it is?
Yeah, you'd need something like, sorry, I'll just hold it up. So this is the Focusrite. So you can see in there I've got 2 cables. So I've got a mic cable and a line cable from the keyboard. So you could use 2 mics there, or if you've already got, like I've overhit, I'm not going to pick it up because it's all connected up, but I've also got a mixing desk. What used to be my living room is now a studio at this side of the room. So yeah, I've got a mixing desk, and I also take a feed from that. So I could, in theory, I could plug in a whole bunch of different mics and all sorts, and just feed it straight into the Pi. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So so there's an interface between the mics and the Pi. Okay.
I don't, for mine, I don't use this little USB Sabrent, which is only a couple of quid, which is what my singers have. They just have an in and out for their headset. For me, I'm connecting using the Focusrite or using the mixing desk into that. Okay. So it's a different setup for me because I've got different requirements.
Yeah. Okay, great. Kirsty, we can have an offline discussion about that, whether we can, do something with writing something separately about Jack Trip, because I think there's a lot of interest there. So, Sharon, have I overlooked anything that we should answer, because it is now 20 to 12? So
yeah, sure. I've scrolled back through all the questions, and I think Robin and David have done a very good job of answering everything in the chat. So I'll circulate the chats to everybody afterwards, and that will have pretty much everything in there. And we'll just get Kirsty, if Kirsty doesn't mind, just to email us the details of her setup as well, so we can put that in the email.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody. Clearly, this was there was even more interest than I thought there would be in this session, and so many questions. And I think it's brilliant that you're all having a go. It is making a difference to us, and we're all learning so much about this as well. It's been. I want to really thank our speakers, Kirsty, Robin, and David, and Leon, for making the time this morning. And sorry we have overrun. And we really appreciate your expert contribution to share that with everybody else. So thank you very much, and we will be looking to publishing the recording of this so you can look back on it. Thank you, and have a good weekend. Bye.